The girl didn't flinch when Ghost dismounted. Most people did. The leather cut, the chains, the reputation that preceded him like a shadow. But she just watched him with eyes that had seen too much already. "You lost, kid." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "My mom's car broke down about 2 miles back." She pointed down the highway. "She went to find a signal, told me to stay put." Ghost's jaw tightened. A woman alone in the desert with a dead car and no cell service. A child abandoned on a roadside. Every protective instinct he'd buried decades ago started clawing its way back to the surface. "How long ago?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. "I'm not really sure." The girl's voice wavered slightly, the first crack in her resolve. She said not to talk to strangers. "Your mom's smart." Ghost looked down the empty highway, then back at the girl. "Name's Marcus. Most people call me Ghost. I'm going to help you find her. That okay?" The girl hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm Emma." Ghost didn't know much about kids. His own son, the one he'd walked away from 14 years ago, would be older than Emma now. Probably didn't want anything to do with him. But he knew about loyalty. He knew about keeping people safe. He knew about the weight of a promise, even one made to a stranger. He helped Emma onto the back of his bike, drove slowly down the highway, watching the shoulder for signs of distress. His senses, honed by decades of violence and survival, scanned for threats. The desert was too quiet, too still. Then he saw it. Tire tracks leading off the road, and a sedan listing to one side like a wounded animal. Emma's mother was standing beside the car, her phone held high, searching for signal. When she saw the motorcycle, her face went pale. Ghost understood. A biker pulling up to an isolated car with a vulnerable child wasn't a comfort. It was a threat. He stopped 20 feet away, removed his helmet slowly, and raised his hands slightly. "Your daughter's safe," he said calmly. "Car trouble?" Emma's mother's eyes darted between Ghost and her daughter. He could see the calculation happening. Fear versus practicality. "The engine died about 30 minutes ago. I was trying to get a signal. There's a station about 15 miles north. I can tow you there, or I can ride and get help." Ghost's voice was steady, non-threatening. "Either way, you're not staying out here." Emma's mother's shoulders relaxed slightly. "We have roadside assistance through our insurance. I'm sorry, I don't even know your name." "Ghost. And don't be sorry. Things happen." He pulled out his phone. "I've got signal here. Let me call it in for you. What's your policy number?" 15 minutes later, Ghost had arranged for a tow truck and stayed while they waited. He sat on his bike, silent and still, a dark guardian against the endless sky. Emma stood beside him, one small hand resting against his arm, and he didn't pull away. When the truck arrived, Emma's mother approached him with genuine gratitude in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. If something had happened to her." "Nothing happened," Ghost said quietly. "She's safe. That's what matters." As they watched the sedan being loaded onto the truck, Emma turned back and looked at Ghost. "You're not like what people say bikers are like." Ghost almost smiled. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm exactly like what people say. But today, I made a choice to be something else." He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "You remember that, Emma. You remember that people can choose to be better, even when the world says they can't." She nodded solemnly, and Ghost watched them drive away. He stood there for a long moment, watching the road empty again, feeling something shift inside him. A door he'd locked a long time ago had cracked open just slightly. He didn't know it yet, but that crack would become a chasm. Ghost rode back to the Iron Promise clubhouse as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The desert turned golden, then crimson, and by the time he pulled into the lot, darkness was settling like a living thing. The clubhouse was a fortress of brick and steel on the edge of a small Nevada town called Redemption. Ironic for a place where most of the men inside had given up on redemption years ago. Harley-Davidsons lined the parking area like soldiers at rest, and through the open doors he could hear the familiar sounds of brotherhood, laughter, pool balls cracking, the clink of beer bottles. Inside, the smell hit him first. Beer, cigarette smoke, and the indefinable scent of worn leather that meant home to men like him. The colors were everywhere. Jackets with the Iron Promise emblem. A skeletal hand gripping a chain, stitched across broad backs. Ghost! His VP, a massive man named Tanner with a scar running down the left side of his face, called from the bar. "Where the hell you been all day?" "Riding, thinking." Ghost moved toward the bar, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "What's happening?" "Got a call about an hour ago. Junior's been picked up by the sheriff's office. Says they want to question him about the warehouse fire 2 weeks back." Ghost's entire body went rigid. Junior, just 19, prospect for the club, more kid than criminal. The warehouse fire had killed nobody but had destroyed 50 grand worth of equipment the club needed for legitimate business. And Junior had been there, admitted as much, but swore he didn't set it. "They got evidence?" Ghost's voice had gone cold. "Dangerous. Nothing solid. Just want to ask questions. But we know how this goes, Ghost. They lean on a kid like that without representation. He might say something that sticks his neck in a noose." Ghost pulled out his phone and dialed their lawyer, a sharp woman named Diane, who'd kept more of them out of prison than any judge had sent away. By the time he ended the call, half the club had gathered around him. "We're sending 3 of you to the station. Don't look threatening. Just be present. Let them know Junior's not alone." Ghost's eyes moved across the assembled faces. "Tanner, Brick, you go. Hang tight until Diane gets there." As they moved to comply, Ghost's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The girl you helped today. Emma. She's in danger. Meet me at the old mill, midnight. Come alone." A friend Ghost stared at the message for a long moment. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize a setup, to understand that a stranger reaching out meant complications, but he also recognized something else, the tremor in his chest that said Emma was in real trouble, and he'd made a promise, unspoken but absolute, to keep her safe. He looked at Tanner. "You handle Junior. I got something I need to do." "At midnight?" Tanner's scarred face creased with concern. I know what it is. I'm going anyway." The old flour mill sat 3 miles outside town, abandoned for 30 years. Its skeletal frame rose against the night sky like a monument to a dead industry. Windows empty as eye sockets, wood rotting from decades of wind and neglect. Ghost arrived early, parking his bike a quarter-mile away and approaching on foot, every sense alert for ambush. The message had said, midnight. It was 11:47 when he slipped through the chain-link fence and moved toward the structure. His hand rested on the Punta 38 Special holstered at his hip, not his preferred weapon, but reliable. He found them inside, Emma and her mother, both alive, both unharmed, but both terrified. And standing between them and the only exit was a man Ghost recognized instantly, Detective Ray Morrison. The same cop who'd been looking for reasons to arrest Iron Promise members for the past 5 years. "Ghost," Morrison said almost cheerfully. "Thanks for coming. Makes this so much easier. Let them go." Ghost's voice was absolutely flat. "Whatever this is, they're not part of it." "Oh, but they are. See, I've been watching you, Riley. Got yourself a bleeding heart, helping stranded motorists, making promises to little girls." Morrison stepped closer, and Ghost could smell the alcohol on his breath. "That makes them leverage. That makes them useful." Emma's eyes locked onto Ghost's, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted in him. She wasn't afraid of Morrison. She was afraid that Ghost might believe he had to surrender, that he might think he couldn't protect her. Stop scrolling. This is where it gets real. Like and comment if you want to see how this ends. Ghost smiled, a cold, terrible smile that had made harder men than Morrison reconsider their life choices. "You made a mistake, detective. You brought me into a place where I've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. You threatened a child I've already made a promise to protect." Ghost took a step forward. "That was the mistake." Morrison reached for his service weapon, but Ghost was faster, muscle memory from 3 decades of violence flowing through him like dark water. The gun went flying, Morrison went down, and Ghost stood over him breathing hard, ready for anything. But Emma just walked to him and took his hand. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I knew you wouldn't let him hurt us." Ghost looked at her small hand in his, at her mother standing behind her with tears streaming down her face, at Detective Morrison bleeding on the concrete, and realized something had fundamentally changed inside him. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was something else now, a guardian, a promise keeper, a man willing to fall into the darkness for someone else's light. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." By 2 a.m., the Iron Promise Clubhouse was chaos controlled by testosterone and loyalty. Word had spread that Ghost had put a cop on the ground, and there were immediate calculations being made about consequences, about legal strategy, about how hard the club needed to push back. Diane arrived with Junior trailing behind her, exhausted but uncharged. The detectives' heavy-handed questioning had yielded nothing, and without evidence, they had nothing to hold him on. But Ghost's situation was different. He sat in the back room with Tanner, Diane, and the club's president, an old man named Savage, who'd been riding since before Ghost was born. Savage had a face like cracked leather, and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "Morrison's claiming assault," Diane said, reviewing her notes. "Says you attacked him without provocation. His word against yours." "The girl and her mother are witnesses," Ghost said. "Morrison brought them there. He was using them as leverage to get me to—" Ghost stopped, realizing he didn't actually know what Morrison wanted. "To do something." He didn't get that far. "Morrison's dirty," Savage said quietly. "Everyone knows it. He's been shaking down dealers, running side hustles with the Mexican cartels. He's also got friends in high places, which means this is going to be ugly." Ghost nodded. He'd expected nothing less. "I'll turn myself in, take it to trial. The girl and her mother can testify." "Absolutely not," Diane said firmly. "You're not testifying that you met a child on a roadside and then showed up at an abandoned mill in the middle of the night. That looks like grooming, Ghost. That looks like predatory behavior, regardless of the truth." The words hit him like a punch. He'd been so focused on protecting Emma that he hadn't considered how the narrative could be twisted, how his act of kindness could be weaponized against him, how the world would see a middle-aged biker and a 10-year-old girl and jump to the darkest possible conclusion. "So what do we do?" Ghost's voice was hollow. Savage leaned back in his chair. "We disappear the girl and her mother somewhere safe. We let Morrison scream into the void, and we give Diane enough ammunition to shred him in court if it comes to that. And Ghost," Savage's old eyes fixed on his, "you don't talk to that girl again. Not directly. Not for a long time." Ghost wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but he understood the calculus. Emma's safety depended on him stepping back, on removing himself from her life, on letting her move forward without the shadow of a biker falling across her future. "Where will they go?" he asked quietly. "Somewhere safe," Diane said. "I have resources. But you can't know where, and you can't ask. That's the only way we protect all of you." Ghost nodded slowly, understanding that he was about to make another kind of promise, the promise to let go, to step away, to accept that sometimes protecting someone meant abandoning them. But before they could finalize the plan, there was a knock on the clubhouse door. Tanner opened it to find Emma's mother standing there, soaking wet from the rain that had started outside, her hair plastered to her face and desperation burning in her eyes. "I need to see Ghost," she said. "Emma, she wrote something. You need to see it." Emma's mother handed him a piece of paper, carefully folded and worn from being carried. Ghost's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Emma's handwriting was careful, deliberate, each letter formed with the precision of a child trying to be taken seriously. "Dear Ghost, I know you probably can't see me anymore because of what happened with the detective. Mom explained it to me, and I understand. But I wanted you to know that you changed something inside me. You showed me that good people exist in the world, and that sometimes they do good things even when it's hard. You showed me that a promise isn't just words. It's proof that someone cares enough to risk everything. I'm going to remember you forever. Not because you saved me from the detective, but because you stopped on a dusty road and treated me like I mattered. That's a kind of magic, I think. That's a kind of promise that doesn't need words. I hope someday you'll be happy. I hope someday you'll have a life where you don't have to be strong all the time. I think you deserve that. Love, Emma P.S. I'm keeping a piece of the desert rock you picked up today. Every time I touch it, I'll remember that I'm not alone in the world." Ghost read the letter 3 times, each word hitting him differently. By the third read-through, tears were streaming down his face, something that hadn't happened in 14 years, since the day he'd walked away from his own son and never looked back. Emma's mother watched him, understanding everything. "She wanted you to know that she knows why you have to let her go," Emma's mother said softly. "She's wise beyond her years. She understands sacrifice." "Where will you go?" Ghost asked, his voice rough. "Somewhere north. Arizona, maybe. We'll start over. Diane arranged everything. New names, new school, new life." Emma's mother paused. "I want you to know that you changed my daughter's life. Not by the dramatic moment with the detective, but by stopping on a roadside and seeing her as a person who mattered. That's the kind of thing a child remembers forever." Ghost carefully folded Emma's letter and placed it inside his jacket, next to his heart. "Tell her." He stopped, understanding that he couldn't tell her anything directly, not anymore. "Just tell her that she was right. Tell her that sometimes a promise is the most powerful thing a person can make." Emma's mother nodded, understanding what she was being asked to carry forward. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The detective, what will happen to him?" "Diane will bury him in paperwork and procedural violations," Savage said from his chair. "He picked the wrong target. He picked a man with brothers who will spend as long as it takes dismantling his career. He picked a child who matters to someone who can't be intimidated. That detective's finished, even if it takes 5 years to prove it." After Emma's mother left, Ghost sat in the clubhouse, surrounded by men who'd become his family, holding a letter from a girl who'd been a stranger 48 hours ago, and understood that his entire life had just changed direction. He'd spent 30 years running from redemption, from the possibility that he could be something other than a killer and a criminal. Emma had stopped on a roadside and handed it to him anyway, wrapped in kindness and uncomplicated trust. Now he had a choice: refuse the gift and go back to being Ghost, or accept it and become something new. 3 months later, Detective Morrison was suspended pending investigation. Diane had discovered a pattern of evidence tampering dating back 7 years, financial records that didn't match his salary, and witness testimonies from at least a dozen people he'd shaken down. His career was in freefall and everyone knew it. Ghost had turned himself in voluntarily, and with Diane's defense and Emma's letter, which she'd given permission to use, even in sealed testimony, establishing the context, the charges against him had been reduced to misdemeanor assault. He'd accepted a plea deal, served 60 days in county, and emerged with his record intact relative to the severity of the crime. The iron promise had held firm. No retaliation, no escalation, just the quiet, patient work of men who understood that the best revenge was simply surviving and thriving while your enemies fell apart. Ghost spent his days at the clubhouse now, doing legitimate work, helping Tanner manage the bike shop that kept the MC's finances above board, training younger prospects and mentoring anyone who needed it. He'd stopped riding solo long distances and had started attending community meetings, even volunteering with a local youth centre. The brothers joked about his transformation, but not unkindly. They understood that Ghost had found something most of them never would, a reason to be more than what they'd become. Diane stopped by one afternoon with news. Morrison took an early severance. He's leaving Nevada. He's a broken man, Ghost. He'll never be able to use his badge again, never be able to work in law enforcement. His pension is drastically reduced, and there's a civil suit pending. Good, Ghost said simply. You could have pursued this more aggressively. You could have demanded more, Diane observed. I got what I needed, Ghost replied. Morrison couldn't hurt that girl anymore. That was always the point. That evening, Ghost received a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, his breath caught in his chest. It was a photo of Emma, now in Arizona, standing in front of a school with a new name. She was smiling, genuinely smiling, without fear in her eyes. Below the photo was a single line, still carrying the desert rock, still remembering the promise. Ghost stared at the photo for a long time, then showed it to Savage. The old president nodded slowly. You did good, son. You did real good. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and subscribe, because Ghost's journey is far from over. 6 months had passed since Emma and her mother disappeared into the Arizona desert, since Ghost had made the hardest choice of his life, to let go of the only redemption he'd ever allowed himself to feel. The Iron Promise Clubhouse had settled back into its familiar rhythms, the sound of pool balls cracking against felt, the perpetual hum of the jukebox playing songs about lost love and broken promises, the low rumble of Harleys coming and going like a heartbeat. Ghost had thrown himself into work. The bike shop had become his sanctuary, the one place where he could lose himself in the precise mechanics of restoration and repair. There was something deeply satisfying about taking something broken and making it whole again, a metaphor he understood on a level that went beyond the physical. He spent his days elbow deep in engine grease, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, letting his hands do what his mind couldn't, heal. The 1984 Shovelhead was his masterpiece that month. It belonged to a younger prospect named Danny, just 22, fresh from a rough home life, trying to prove himself to the club through loyalty and hard work. Ghost had been mentoring him, seeing in the kid's eyes the same desperate hunger for family that he'd once carried. The bike had been a wreck when Danny brought it in. Engine seized, transmission shot, frame cracked in 2 places. But Ghost had taken it apart piece by piece, cleaned every component, welded what could be welded, replaced what couldn't. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Tanner found him under the bike, wrench in hand, music bleeding through his earbuds as he worked on the carburetor. "Ghost!" Tanner called, his voice cutting through the mechanical symphony. "You need to come inside. Now." There was something in Tanner's tone that made Ghost freeze. In 3 decades of riding together, Ghost had learned to read every inflection in his VP's voice. This one carried weight, consequence, something that demanded attention immediately. Ghost rolled out from under the bike, wiping his hands on a rag that had stopped being clean months ago. "What's wrong?" "Just come." Inside the clubhouse, the usual afternoon crowd had assembled in the main room. Prospect Danny was there, along with Savage sitting in his chair like a judge on a throne, and Diane, their lawyer, standing near the bar with a peculiar expression that Ghost couldn't quite read. She'd been coming around less frequently since the Morrison situation had been resolved, and seeing her now triggered every alarm bell in his system. "Sit," Savage said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Ghost sat. Diane pulled up a chair beside him. and the room went quiet in a way that suggested everyone knew what was coming, except Ghost himself. "I received a call this afternoon," Diane began, her voice careful, measured. "From a woman in Arizona. She was calling on behalf of her daughter, who wanted to get in touch with you. There are some complications, which is why I'm here instead of you just getting a phone call." Ghost's heart rate picked up. "Emma?" "Emma," Diane confirmed. "She's been writing letters for months. Her mother has been holding them, trying to figure out the legal implications of a sustained contact between you and her child. Given the nature of how you first met and the detective situation, we all agreed that direct communication needed to be carefully managed." "But," Ghost heard the word hanging unspoken at the end of Diane's sentence. "But Emma is now 11 years old," Diane continued. "She's psychologically healthy, thriving in school, has built a solid social network in Arizona, and most importantly—" Diane paused, letting the weight of this sink in. "She's old enough now that the legal complications of a mentorship relationship between you two are significantly reduced. She's not a young child anymore. She's a pre-adolescent with agency and voice." "What's she want?" Ghost's voice came out rough. "She wants to see you," Diane said simply. "Her mother is bringing her to Nevada for 1 week in July. Emma specifically requested that you agree to spend time with her, not in secret, not hidden, but openly, as a mentor figure. She's written extensively about what you meant to her, how that day on the roadside changed her understanding of what kindness could look like." Diane pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs. Emma at school, at a park, at what looked like a birthday party. She'd grown since Ghost had last seen her, had developed the awkward limbs of a child moving toward adolescence, but her eyes were the same, intelligent, kind, marked by understanding that most adults never achieved. "Her mother wants to meet with you before the visit," Diane explained, "to understand your intentions, to establish boundaries, to make sure this is going to be something that helps Emma and doesn't create new complications. And I've advised her that it would be beneficial if you had a neutral third party present during your interactions, someone who can verify that everything is appropriate, that everything is above board." Savage nodded slowly. "We can arrange for Diane or another neutral party to be present whenever Ghost and Emma meet. That protects everyone: Emma, her mother, Ghost, and the club. Understood?" "Understood," Ghost said quietly. But inside, his entire internal landscape had shifted. The girl he'd thought he'd have to let go of forever was reaching back across 6 months and 600 miles to tell him that their meeting had meant something. That his promise, the one he'd made with a glance, with a decision to stop instead of ride past, had resonated through time and distance and legal complications. "When?" Ghost asked. "July 10th, Diane said. "She arrives on a Saturday. Her mother wants to meet with you first, at a neutral location, perhaps the coffee shop on Main Street. 2 hours, just you and Emma's mother, establishing parameters." Ghost nodded, understanding the wisdom of this arrangement, even as every part of him ached to see Emma immediately, to confirm that she was truly safe and happy, that his sacrifice of letting her go had actually served her well. The weeks leading up to July 10th stretched like taffy in Ghost's perception. Time moved both impossibly slowly and impossibly fast. He found himself obsessing over details. Should he wear his cut, or something more neutral? Should he prepare something to say, or let the conversation flow naturally? What did an 11-year-old girl want from a man who'd been a stranger in her life for exactly 1 day? He talked to Savage about it late one night, sitting in the president's office with beers sweating in their hands and the weight of the desert pressing against the windows outside. "You're overthinking this," Savage said, his old eyes reflecting the neon from the parking lot. "That girl reached across time to find you because what you represented mattered to her. She didn't need you to be perfect. She needed you to be real. She needed to know that stopping mattered, that seeing her mattered, that a promise to a stranger was worth keeping. "I'm scared," Ghost admitted, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "Scared that I'll disappoint her. Scared that I can't live up to whatever she's built me into in her head." Savage smiled, and it was the saddest, warmest expression Ghost had ever seen on the old man's face. "Then tell her that. Tell her that you're scared too. Tell her that you kept a promise that cost you everything, and you'd do it again, but that you're not a hero. You're just a man who decided to stop and see another human being. That's the real promise, Ghost. That's the one that matters." July 10th arrived, wrapped in heat and anticipation. Ghost spent the morning detailing his bike with obsessive care, cleaning his leather cut until it gleamed, taking a shower and actually shaving, something he rarely bothered with. When he arrived at the coffee shop at 2 p.m., Emma's mother was already waiting, sitting at an outdoor table with 2 iced coffees, her face a mix of nerves and determination. "Marcus," she said, standing to shake his hand, "it's been a long time." "It has," Ghost replied, sitting across from her. "How is she?" "She's remarkable," Emma's mother said, her voice carrying the kind of pride that only a parent could express. "Truly remarkable. She has friends, she's excelling in school, she's developed interests in art and literature. She's built a life, Ghost, a real, solid, healthy life." "I'm glad," Ghost said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "But she talks about you," Emma's mother continued, "not constantly, not obsessively, but regularly. She talks about how you stopped on a roadside when you didn't have to, how you treated her like she mattered, how you kept a promise that cost you everything." Emma's mother paused. "She's very intelligent, Marcus. She understands what happened. She knows about the detective, about the legal complications, about why you had to step back. And she's processed all of that. She's not carrying trauma or resentment. She's carrying gratitude." "What does she want from me?" Ghost asked. "I think she wants to know that you're okay," Emma's mother said simply. "I think she wants to confirm that the man who helped her that day is still in there, still fighting, still keeping promises, and I think—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I think she might want to be part of your life going forward, not in the complicated way of 6 months ago, but in a straightforward way. A kid who admires a man, and a man who's willing to be someone worth admiring." Ghost felt something crack open inside his chest. "I can do that." "I know you can," Emma's mother said. "I've known it since the day you stopped on that roadside. That's why I'm giving you permission to have a relationship with my daughter. Not a romantic one, obviously, but a mentorship, a friendship, a genuine connection between 2 people who've already proven they can care about each other across difficult circumstances." They spent 2 hours at that coffee shop, establishing boundaries and expectations. Emma's mother was thoughtful, thorough, and clearly protective without being paranoid. She understood Ghost's nature, his history, his demons, and she was offering him something he'd never expected, redemption that came with conditions, but without judgment. "She'll want to show you around," Emma's mother said, as they were wrapping up. "She'll want to tell you stories, ask you questions, understand who you are beyond the moment when you stopped and changed her life. Can you be present for that?" "Yes," Ghost said simply. "Yes, I can." The next day, Ghost was back at the same coffee shop, and this time Emma was with her mother. She'd grown in the 6 months since he'd last seen her, had developed in ways that spoke to health and happiness. Her eyes were the same, intelligent, kind, understanding, but now they also carried confidence, the confidence of a child who'd been loved and supported, who'd been allowed to heal. She saw Ghost and stood up, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the distance of 6 months and everything that had happened in between. Then she walked to him and hugged him, fierce and genuine, and Ghost understood that he'd been forgiven for the hardest part of keeping his promise, the part where he'd had to let her go. The week that Emma spent in Nevada with her mother became the template for everything that followed. Ghost spent mornings at the coffee shop, afternoons at the bike shop, where Emma learned about motorcycles and restoration, and evenings at restaurants where he could introduce her to different parts of his world without the darkness ever touching her. She was curious about everything: how engines worked, why Ghost had chosen the name Ghost, what it meant to be part of a motorcycle club, whether he was scared during the confrontation with Detective Morrison. Ghost answered every question with honesty, never talking down to her, never pretending that the world was simpler or safer than it actually was. "Aren't you scared?" Emma asked one afternoon, sitting in the bike shop, watching Ghost work on Danny's shovel head. "Like, don't you ever wake up scared that something bad will happen?" "Every day," Ghost admitted, not looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. "That's what 30 years of living hard teaches you. There's always something to be scared of: bad people, bad luck, bad timing. The trick isn't to stop being scared. The trick is to decide that being scared isn't enough of a reason to stop doing the right thing." Emma nodded slowly, processing this. "That's why you stopped for me, isn't it? Even though I was a stranger and you didn't know what could happen?" "Yeah," Ghost said. "That's exactly why." By the middle of the week, Emma had become a fixture at the clubhouse. The brothers treated her with a combination of gentleness and respect that surprised Ghost. These were hard men, violent men in many cases, but they understood what Ghost had understood: that this child represented something sacred, something worth protecting. Savage spent an afternoon teaching her to play chess. Tanner showed her how to change a motorcycle tire. And even Prospect Danny, who'd been struggling with confidence and belonging, found himself standing taller because Emma asked him thoughtful questions about his life and listened to his answers. On the final evening of Emma's visit, Ghost took her to the edge of the desert where he'd first found her, and they sat on the hood of her mother's rental car, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "I have something for you," Emma said, pulling a small object from her pocket. It was worn smooth by months of handling, glowing slightly in the fading light. The desert rock Ghost had given her 6 months ago. "I want you to have this back," Emma continued. "Not because I'm leaving. We're going to stay in touch, right? Mom said we could video call every other week, and I can come back next summer if you want me to." "I want that," Ghost said immediately. "I want all of that. But I want you to have the rock back because I'm not alone anymore," Emma explained, placing it in his weathered palm. "I have a whole life now. I have Mom and friends and school and a future that isn't scary anymore. I don't need a reminder that someone in the world cares about me. But you—" She paused, and Ghost could see her gathering the courage to say something important. "You might need a reminder that you can change someone's life just by stopping and seeing them. You might need to remember that you're not just Ghost, the biker. You're also the man who kept his promise." Ghost looked at the desert rock in his hand, at the girl sitting beside him, who'd become something like a daughter despite the complicated circumstances of their meeting, and understood something fundamental about the nature of redemption. It wasn't about erasing your past. It wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about carrying the weight of who you'd been while choosing consistently to be someone better. It was about keeping promises even when they were hard, especially when they were hard. "Thank you," Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion, "for reminding me." The months that followed. After Emma left Nevada, Ghost made a decision that surprised even Savage. He started volunteering at the youth center on Saturday mornings. Just a few hours a week, nothing that interfered with club business, but enough to put him in contact with kids who needed the same thing Emma had needed: to be seen, to be valued, to understand that they mattered to someone. The work was slow and often thankless. Many of the kids he encountered came from broken homes, abusive situations, trauma they hadn't begun to process. Ghost didn't try to save them all. He understood his limitations, but he listened, and he was present. And occasionally, just occasionally, he was able to stop long enough to see a kid who'd started to believe the world was invisible to them, didn't notice them, wouldn't care if they disappeared. The desert rock from Emma became a permanent fixture on the shelf behind the bar at the Iron Promise clubhouse. Ghost had mounted it on a small wooden stand with a brass plaque that read, "A promise kept changes everything." The younger prospects asked about it, and Ghost told them the story, not the dramatic parts, but the real parts, the parts about stopping, about seeing, about understanding that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you could do was treat someone like they mattered. 3 months after Emma's visit, Ghost received a phone call from a social worker at the youth center. A boy named Marcus, coincidentally sharing Ghost's given name, had gotten into a serious situation. He'd been living on the streets after his father's death, had started stealing to survive, and was heading toward the kind of trajectory that ended in prison, or worse. "He asked for you specifically," the social worker explained. "He said you told him that people could choose to be more than what the world expected of them. He wants to talk to you about choices." Ghost didn't hesitate. He spent that afternoon and the next day with young Marcus, helping him understand that his circumstances weren't his fault, but his response to his circumstances was entirely his responsibility. He connected him with resources, with programs, with the kind of network that could actually help a desperate kid find his way back to solid ground. By Christmas, young Marcus had been placed in a group home with people who actually cared, was attending school, had stopped stealing. When Ghost saw him at the youth center, the boy hugged him fiercely and said something that crystallized everything Ghost had learned since that day on the roadside. "You changed me because you believed I could change myself." July, 1 year later. Emma returned to Nevada for her summer visit, now 12 years old, taller and sharper and more confident than she'd been the year before. But the first thing she wanted to do was go to the desert rock and sit in the clubhouse, just her and Ghost, in the late afternoon when the place was quiet. "I wanted to ask you something," Emma said, running her fingers across the desert rock Ghost had placed back in her hands this year before reclaiming it again. "Do you think our promise is finished? Like, do you think we've kept it completely and now we can just let it go?" Ghost considered this carefully. "What do you think?" "I think," Emma said slowly, "that a real promise never really finishes. I think it just changes shape. Like, you kept your promise by helping me that day, then I kept my promise by leaving you alone when you needed to. Then you kept your promise by showing up when I called you back. And now," she paused, "now I think the promise is that we stay in each other's lives, that we remember, that we remind each other that promises matter." Ghost nodded. "I think you're exactly right." "There's something else," Emma said. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a photograph. It showed a boy, maybe 14, sitting at a desk working on schoolwork. "This is Marcus, the street kid you told me about. I wanted to meet him while I was here. Is that okay?" Ghost looked at the photograph, then at Emma. "Why would you want to meet him?" "Because," Emma said simply, "I want him to know that he's not alone. I want him to know that the man who helped him helped a girl too. And now there are 2 of us who understand what it means to be seen when nobody else is looking. I want him to know that promises spread, that they get bigger and bigger until they change the whole world." Ghost felt something profound shift inside his chest. The understanding that redemption wasn't a solitary journey, that it wasn't about one man making one choice one time. It was about a contagion of kindness, of promises kept, of people choosing to see each other across all the distances and complications that usually kept them separate. "Okay," Ghost said. "Let's go meet Marcus together." The final promise. As the sun set over the Nevada desert that evening, Ghost sat in the clubhouse with Emma and young Marcus, the boy who shared his name, and told them about the day that had changed everything. Not as a story meant to inspire them, but as a witness statement, as proof that promises could be kept across impossible odds, that redemption was real, and that sometimes all it took was one person deciding to stop and see another person who the world had rendered invisible. The desert rock sat on the shelf, bearing witness to all of this, to Emma's journey from terrified child to confident girl, to Ghost's journey from man running from redemption to man actively pursuing it, to young Marcus's journey from street kid with no future to young man with real possibilities. And that night, Ghost understood what Savage had been trying to tell him months ago. Redemption wasn't about becoming someone you weren't. It was about becoming someone you could respect, someone who kept promises even when they cost everything, someone who looked at invisible people and decided they mattered. The promise continued. It would continue tomorrow, when Ghost mentored Danny through his struggles. It would continue next month, when Emma video called to tell him about her school year. It would continue next year, when she came back for another summer visit. It would continue every time Ghost stopped instead of rode past, saw instead of looked through, kept his word instead of found an easy excuse. That was the real magic, not the dramatic moment on the roadside, but every ordinary moment after that, where a man chose to be more than what his past had made him, where a girl chose to believe in the possibility of redemption, where a street kid chose to trust that the world contained people worth trusting. That was the promise that never ended. Subscribe now and never miss a moment when someone chooses to keep their promise, no matter how hard it gets.